Okay, so now that we've talked about variables, let's get a little into data types. So we're going to learn about data types and why this is important in coding. So in JavaScript, we see we have, there's kind of these two different main types of data types. We have primitive and reference. So think of primitive as more simple types of data, things like numbers and strings and booleans. And we have this reference type. These are a little more complicated. They can be things like functions and objects. And objects also have kind of branch out into a lot of different things in JavaScript. But let's kind of just look at some examples with this. So JavaScript is dynamically typed, and that might not mean much, but what this means is we don't have to declare the type of variables, the type of data things are. Other languages actually make you declare what type things are. So this makes JavaScript a little nicer to learn, but there's also a downside where we might get ourselves into trouble. But the takeaway here, it's really, really important to think about types of data. So in our last video, we did variables. So we had some like number. Now, we all know numbers pretty well. With numbers, we can do things like math. I can say like number plus 12. I can say minus 12 because this variable number right here is a number. Let's just call this variable some number. So it's a little different. So some number minus 12. And I can come in here and I can do a console.log type of some number. Let's run that. And this is a number. Now I can come in here and I can change this variable. Let's change some number to false. And let's do a console.log of this. Now is some number a number anymore? Well, now this is a Boolean. And a Boolean is pretty straightforward. A Boolean is either true or false. Let's switch this to, let's come here. Let's switch some number to something with quotes wrapped around it. And we're going to see when we wrap things around quotes, we get, I need to say, I don't need to do type of some number. Let's go ahead and run this. This is now a string. So we've seen three types of data. We've seen numbers, we've seen Booleans, we've seen strings. So strings stands for like a string of characters. They're pretty common. So we're using the type of operator just to see what it is. All right, let's look at some less common ones. We actually saw this one last time. If I come in here and I don't assign this a value and I do a console.log, well, I actually get undefined. And undefined is actually a type. So I could also do a type of this. And both of these are going to give me undefined. So the value of this is undefined, and the type of undefined is its own type of undefined. There's also a type of null, which is different than undefined. I can come in here and I can actually assign a variable a value of null. Now if I run this, let's save this. This is null, but the type of null is actually our object. So it's part of that more complicated type of object. Like we said, we had a number. Let's just kind of review that. If I do 12, assign that variable to 12. the value of that is going to be 12. The type of data that's going to be is number. All right. And I'm using this, I want to just point out this data type stuff I'm getting is from this javascript.info tutorial on their data types. It's a great tutorial. They also have some other tutorials. So I'm going to throw this link out in Slack because this is a pretty good resource. Let's look at some other things about numbers. Notice I can also do a float. Now, different languages might make distinctions between integers and floats. JavaScript does not. They are both numbers. So integers, floats, they're all the same. I can also see there's a limit to how big numbers can go in JavaScript. So there's actually a class called number. It's capital M, and I can get like the max safe integer. Let's see what that is. That is as high as JavaScript is going to count up to. So if you want a bigger number than that, we're going to have to look at actually another type of data. I can also do max value just to kind of see some of these values. So notice that's a lot bigger. This is a float, so we can go all the way up to one time, e to the 308 power, which is a huge number. But yeah, we might run into problems if I try to add two of these numbers together. So that is now saying, hey, that is infinity. In reality, that is not infinity. But JavaScript can't go beyond these because it has something to do with how many bits it's using to represent these numbers. We're not going to get into that, but just know these numbers have a limit to how big they can get. There's also a value of nan. This is a data type nan. This stands for not a number. So let's just look at this. Let's just log some number that I've set equal to not a number. Go ahead and run this. So nan, this is a little confusing. This is nan, and the type of data is actually a number. So it's a special kind of number. It's an invalid number. All right. So let's look at another, and I probably shouldn't call this some number. I'll just call this some bar for some variable. Switch these up here. So let's go into strings. Now strings, we use writing double quotes, single quotes, or backticks. So let's just kind of check this out. So I could set this equal to a string. Hello, everyone. So when I log this, I get this is equal to hello, everyone. And this is now a string. And just to show you, I can do this in a single quote as well. It doesn't change anything. Or I can do these in backticks. We'll see there's something special we can do with backticks in 1 second. And there we go. So we can actually add strings together. So let's do like, let's come down here and do this. Let's say let first name equal Bob and let last name equal John. Bob, John. And then we can do we can set a variable let full name equal to first name plus, and then we're going to do space plus last name. And then we can do a console.log full name. So what we can do with strings, we can use our, this isn't math, this isn't addition, this is string concatenation. And we can add two strings, throw this expression into a variable. There's actually a cleaner way to do this. So here's concatenation. I'm going to show you how to do this once, and then I'm never going to do it again, because there's a newer way to do this in JavaScript, and it's with interpolation. And this is where the backticks come in. So what I want to do here is I want to, well, let's just run it like this with the backticks. First name, last name. I don't want it to be first name, last name. I want it to be the actual values of those variables. If I want to do that, I can now interpolate them with a $sign and then curly brackets. And that would abstract the values of those. And it's nice because I can still come in here and write strings that don't get interpolated. So I could do something like this. First name is, and then I can grab it. And then I could come down here and say last name is, and then grab the value. So I can mix strings with variables. And that's why interpolation is really useful. All right, so that's strings. Let's talk about Booleans. We talked about those really quick. Pretty straightforward. Booleans just have two values. So let x equal true. Let y equal false. Those are our two types of Booleans. And we'll get back to Booleans when we talk about conditionals. And yeah, we can do a console.log. Just check. It's always, I think, it's really good as you're going through these tutorials, to print them out and to do the console.logs. And something else you can maybe do with your console.logs, you can combine a string with a variable to maybe get a little more detail. So I can say, hey, x is true, y is true. Well, I actually need to use y. See, and then I could say like type of y. Well, then I can come in here and do the expression type of y. Go ahead and run that. It's a Boolean. All right. Let's just talk about, since we're talking about Booleans, let's talk about, so we know what true and false is, but in JavaScript, there's this concept of truthy and falsy values. And to show this, I'm going to use this helper. So I use a capital case Boolean, and then I can pass this something. Let's just pass it true just to keep this simple. And we'll kind of go through all of these. So this is false. So no surprise here. If I pass true to a Boolean, this is true. And if I pass false to this Boolean and create a Boolean out of this, this is true. Nothing surprising here. So why am I doing, sorry, this is false. Nothing surprising here. Well, where this gets a little confusing is what's referred to as truthy and falsy values. This might take a second to wrap your head around. So this is kind of why I'm going over this now. And we'll see this again when we get to if-else statements, because this is important with if-else statements. So let's say I have an empty string. So an empty string has a false. I'm going to say falsy value. But if I type something in here, a string with a value, this has a truthy value. So I'll say true, false, because that's what it's logging. So we have this concept that things can be truthy and falsy. And I think the best way to kind of look at this is to see all the values that have falsy values, and then you can kind of assume everything else has truthy values. So if I do 0, 0 actually has, and maybe this might be nice to do a little message here. 0 is, I can do one here. An empty string is, I need double quotes here. So we can see this. hello is. See, these are just going to help when I run this. It's going to give me a nice little log. So we can see an empty string is false, 0 is false, hello is true. And then I'll throw this one down here just to show you. Let's do so we saw 0 is false, but any other number is going to be have a truthy value. All right, so let's look at some other falsy values. We have an empty object. Look at objects later, but let's make sure. Oh, an empty object is true. Sorry, I forgot about that. So we'll throw that one here. Empty object is true. We have undefined. What is undefined? Well, let's run it. Undefined is false. What else did we have? We had our null value. Null is also going to be a falsy value. Kind of makes sense that like an empty string, null, 0, that these are false values. We also have our nan. Nan is also going to be a falsy value. Nan is false. So everything else is essentially going to be a truthy value. So when we get to our if-else statements, we'll see this more. There's some other types. There's a symbol in JavaScript. This is a new type. I'm going to skip over this. You can read over this if you want. There's also a big int type. Once again, I'm going to skip over this too. We saw with integers, we could have a limitation of how big we could go. But if you really need a big integer, JavaScript has this new type called a big int. But we'll look at those later. There's also a object type. Now we saw that nan was an object, but there is also this object type, and we declare objects like this. Get rid of this. So I can say let person equal, and we use these closing, opening, and closing, and opening, closing curly brackets. So I do console.log type of person, run that, and that's our object. Now persons allow us to have these key value pairs, but we'll talk about that later. Another thing we'll see is, and we'll look more in objects later, is we'll also see arrays. This is another type. Let's see, people. And how we do arrays is square brackets, and then we can throw in other types of data. So let's actually just do this as nums. So with arrays, I could have an array of numbers. Now, when I do a type of nums, I'm saying we have a array type. It's not going to say it. Well, it's not exactly an array. See, this also comes up as an object. But this is a little different. I could do something like this. If I really want to show that it's an array, I could do array.isArray, and then I could pass that my array. And we're going to see arrays are, that's not defined. I need to spell that right. That is true. So this actually is in an array of numbers. And we'll look at objects and arrays more, but I just kind of wanted to bring up these types. So to review, let's just go back up to this picture. Here are the main types. Oh, well, let me just also say this. We do have a function type. So again, we'll just briefly go over this. we can write functions in JavaScript. I'll just do a console.log type of X. That gives us a function. And we're going to spend a lot of times on functions, but looking back at this diagram, we see we have these primitive types of null, undefined, Boolean, number, string, big int, and symbol. And then we had these other two that, we're going to spend a lot more time with objects. Objects allow us to have key value pairs. We all actually saw an array in JavaScript is an object. In many other languages, arrays are their own type of data. And I'm going to kind of treat them as such, that an array is different than an object. And then we have functions. So this is a lot. The main important point here as you're learning to code is these are things you kind of want to start tracking in your mind. Hey, what type of data am I working with? Because it matters. Let me just give you one example of this, why it matters. So let's say we have, some number, which is 1, and then I have some other number, which is actually the string 2. What happens if I, add these two together? Well, let's see. Let's do a console.log X. This actually gives me 12. This actually, and if I do this, this is also important to type of to look at this. See, this gives me 12. It gives me actually this string back. What it does is it does string concatenation. Now, JavaScript behind the scenes converts that to a 1, and then it adds the string 2 to it, which gives us the string 12. So that is a string. Another reason why this is important type of data, let's say we have these two variables and I'll assign them to the same value. Let's do a console.log, and we'll talk about equality in the next video, but I'm going to see, hey, does this number, are they the same? This is true. So 1 equals the string 1. What? That maybe doesn't make sense. We can do a strict equality with 3 equals. So if I do 2 equals, that actually ignores the type and it sees, hey, are these actually equal? But now if I do 3 equals, it actually looks at the type of data. So it is important to keep track of the types of data, especially since JavaScript is dynamically typed, which means it doesn't enforce it. You as a programmer kind of need to keep track. So I think this is a good place to stop. We'll spend a lot more time with data types. And yeah, next we'll go into operators.